Welcome to the Small Business Evangelist radio show, the show that brings you candid interviews, case studies, and cross-industry insights to help you accelerate your own small business success. Here's your show host and small business evangelist, Jack Schoenberger.
All right, today we have Bobby Klinck. Bobby Klinck is a intellectual property lawyer out of Washington, D.C., and I've asked Bobby today to talk a little bit about the story and how he got to where he is today as an intellectual property lawyer. But for some of those folks that are maybe not familiar with intellectual property or what an intellectual property lawyer does, Bobby, could you take them through that real quick?
Yeah, I'd love to. And thanks for having me on. So intellectual property is broadly defined as just about anything you can own that isn't something you can hold in your hand necessarily and isn't a piece of dirt. So it's anything that's kind of a creation of the mind or has value separate from its kind of tangible fixed form. There are four really big areas and then one small area of intellectual property. The four big areas are patents, which everyone's heard about, and that covers basically an invention, a novel, new invention. Then you have trademarks, which is anything, a word, a symbol, a mark that designates the source of a good or product. So let me give you a classic example. You have Nike, that's a brand name, that's a trademark. Then you have the actual swoosh logo, that's a trademark. And then also Just Do It, that's a slogan that can also be trademarked. So that's what a trademark is. Then you have copyright, which most people have some general sense of. It protects anything that is a creative work that's put into fixed form. And so it would cover a movie, a book, music, any kind of creative thing, including your website, for example, or if you have written work that you give out to people for free, for example, that would be covered as well. The final big area is trade secrets, and that's an area of law that if you have kind of a secret sauce to your business or a secret information that has value and you take steps to keep it secret, it's protected. So the classic example is the Coke formula or the Kentucky Fried Chicken spice recipe. But other examples are your customer list, your CRM database, those kinds of things. If you take steps to protect them, they're trade secrets. And then I said there's this little area which is a right to publicity. So everybody has a right to their own publicity. So you can't use their fame to build your brand without their permission. That really only comes into real importance if you're doing something with a celebrity of some sort. I mean, I have a right to my publicity, but I'm happy to let anybody who wants to use it for all I care, because that is what I'm doing. I'm trying to get this message out to people and help people. So that's what intellectual property law or intellectual property is. There are different kinds of intellectual property lawyers. You have some people who specialize in a specific area. So they are patent lawyers who help people get patents. There are trademark lawyers who help you get a trademark, et cetera. I'm kind of in a different group. I'm a broader lawyer. I help people with the strategy piece, coming up with an overall strategy for their business. And then we kind of outsource the actual execution to people who are much cheaper. So you can get a trademark, someone to file a trademark for you for $100 plus the fee. I couldn't come close to matching that. Plus, I don't do it all day, every day. So it's much easier and cheaper to go with the specialist to get the little pieces done. But so that's kind of a breakdown of what intellectual property lawyers do.
I appreciate that. Just another quick question. Now, for businesses that are starting up that think are there actual now? I know they have talked about having a marketing plan and advertising plan and part of a business plan. Do you actually help startups develop an intellectual property plan as part of your strategy?
Yeah, that's part of what I do. I have a book about that where people can read it and kind of do a lot of it themselves, but that's one of the things I definitely help people with. And part of the reason why I do, and I try to stress this to people, is there's this little known fact, or little known among entrepreneurs, they just don't think about it, but the vast majority of the value of every business, and especially a startup business, an online business, et cetera, is its intellectual property. There are studies out there that suggest that on average, American companies, 80% of their value comes from these intangible assets or intellectual property. And if you think about it, if you're a startup or if you're an online business, that's going to be higher. If you're online, you probably don't have a lot of investment in equipment. You don't have a lot of investment in a physical location. So probably 95% of your value is your know-how. It's those intangible things. So I think it's imperative for businesses to create an intellectual property plan and just have a plan for it. And part of that is you're not going to be able to afford to do everything. So you have to kind of triage and figure out what you should be protecting, where you should spend your money, et cetera. And that's one of the things I help clients do.
Well, in listening to you, I can actually hear the passion in your voice about this topic. Can you tell us your journey to becoming an intellectual property lawyer?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that I set out to be. When I went to law school, of all things, I thought I wanted to go work for the ACLU, and that was really my initial passion, I think, before law school. Then I went to law school, and as often tends to happen, I got these opportunities to work completely different, just to work at a big law firm making a ton of money. I mean, money that I had never seen or thought about or even dreamt of when I first went to law school. And so I did that, and I went and worked at one of the biggest firms in the country, and then a smaller but still what would be in lawyer term thought of as a firm that handles the same types of cases as big firms here in DC. So I did those two for about 5 years total. And in that role, I was a cog in a machine largely. I was the bottom person or one of the bottom people on a case. But the cases were just kind of a hodgepodge of what lawyers call commercial litigation. The way to think of it is, if it's two companies suing each other about money, it could be in that group without there being some kind of special area of law at issue. So a contract dispute, a dispute along that realm is largely what I did. And at the time I was chafing. I didn't know why, but I wasn't having a good time. At the time I thought it was because I wanted to do certain tasks, meaning as kind of a lawyer, you have to build a skill set in doing these things. And I thought that was the issue. And by the way, at that point, I wasn't doing advising beforehand. I was getting involved in active litigation. So once there was a dispute, that's what I was doing. So I was fighting with people all day or being part of a team that was fighting with people all day. And so I was trying to build my skill set. After about 5 years, I kind of saw the writing on the wall that these firms I was at, even the smaller firm, most of the cases they had, and I'll get the number wrong, but let's say the amount in dispute was $100 million or just some astronomically large number. So understandably, the clients didn't really want a lawyer who hadn't stood up and argued to a judge or questioned a witness or argued to a jury to do that in their case, because, I mean, I wouldn't want to if I had $100 million at stake. So I had to make a change. And what I did is I went and became a federal prosecutor. And that's actually a pretty common move for people, these big firms. It's a way to go get experience. It had nothing to do with the area of law, but I spent 3 years of my life representing the United States of America, putting away criminals. And I did a mix of what you think of as traditional crimes, drug dealing, illegal gun possession, things like that. But I also did some white collar work, prosecuting people for wire fraud and these various things. And then I came to a crossroads when I was going to leave that job. I knew I was going to go back to a firm and do non-criminal work, some kind of civil work. And again, I was thinking disputes at the time. That's really what I was thinking about. I had an opportunity to go back to the firm where I was, but this is where I really made the big shift in my life. I also found some other smaller firms. And one of them I found was this firm of two lawyers who were doing incredible cases. I mean, they were hitting outside their weight class. They were handling the types of cases that bigger firms handled, very sophisticated work, very interesting work. And it was just two of them, and they were entrepreneurial in that sense that they were building a business. And so I joined them. And I spent some time there, and that was the first time that I was exposed to intellectual property law. And it was a funny story of how, this happens often with lawyers, that you just kind of fall into something. So what happened was I joined that firm, and at the time, they had a few cases that were really active that weren't anything that I had particular experience in. They also had this little patent lawsuit. They didn't have any experience in that. They'd kind of gotten it through somebody that they'd represented in some other matter who said, well, hey, I want you to represent me in this. And right as I joined the firm, that case became active as well. And so it's kind of a normal way of allocating resources. They said, well, you don't really know this other area of law. We do. Here, why don't you take on this case? And so I did. And I was immediately enamored. I just fell in love. It was one of those strange cases where I was against one of the biggest firms in the country. There was probably a team of, I think I counted 8 or 9 lawyers that I knew working on it there, and it was just me. So I was fending off 8 or 9 lawyers' work, plus learning about patent law and other aspects of intellectual property and figuring it out as I went. And even though it was an incredibly stressful period of my life, it was also wonderful. I fell in love immediately. So that started me on the course of handling intellectual property issues. Candidly, I made a classic entrepreneur's mistake, a classic mistake that a lot of business people make. I was unwilling initially to put a flag in the ground and say, I am an intellectual property lawyer. I just didn't want to do it because I thought, oh, well, I need to cast my net broader. And especially when I eventually went out and started my own firm, I was very afraid to say, I'm just doing this one kind of law because I was like, well, there are all these other opportunities I might miss. But that obviously has problems because then I didn't know how to talk to my potential client because I didn't have a potential client. I had the whole world. And when you're trying to talk to the whole world, as I'm sure you know, Jack, you don't get a lot of traction. You've got to find, you need to know who your customer avatar is, where do they gather, how do you talk directly to them so that they hear your message and say, hey, you're talking to me, and hey, I could use your services. So it took me a while to have that aha moment, and it really came when I started working with a business coach who, her first question is, she said, okay, what kind of lawyer are you? And that's when I finally said, okay, I'm an intellectual property lawyer. And she said, okay, well, what industry do you serve? And that was kind of a lot. I was like, I hadn't thought about that question. And she had in mind that I would say telecommunications or Internet of Things or software as a service or something like that, a particular technological area. And I kind of toyed around with those, but I said, that's not really what I want to be doing. About that time, I had really started to get myself really enmeshed in online entrepreneurship. I'd started listening to a bunch of podcasts out there, including things like John Lee Dumas's Entrepreneur on Fire. I had started to dabble in inbound marketing and the other things that online entrepreneurs were doing and Facebook advertising, all of these different things that have become kind of the new way of entrepreneurship on the internet. And it kind of hit me as an aha moment there that what I really wanted to do was work with those people, work with the people who are doing the same things that I'm doing. And so that's when I said, well, I'm an intellectual property lawyer for entrepreneurs. And since I've kind of, niched down further because, a lot of people think they're an entrepreneur, but I really focus on kind of 2 different groups. Some of what I do is work with startup companies. Other part of what I do is work with, your traditional online entrepreneurs, coaches, people who are building a platform online to build their business. And so I work with those groups of folks, help them with intellectual property planning and everything else. And since I've done that, it's been kind of an amazing, it's been amazing for me to see how now I can really drill down and talk to my customer avatar. I've got a very, laid out avatar, especially on the online entrepreneur side. It's about, a whole page long talking about who that person is, what he does, what his concerns are, et cetera. And so that allows me to really, I think, be effective in my marketing. And so that's what brought me here today. And now I'm doing things like this, appearing on podcasts and trying to get the message out there to just help people understand that, hey, even if you don't hire me, make sure you're thinking about this issue because you need to be protecting your IP.
I really appreciate that. I like to circle back and to some of the things that are good business lessons, I think, that you kind of brought up when you talked about drilling down and getting to, your customer avatar and finding out where they were and talk to them. I know Dan Kennedy likes to call it the dog whistle approach, that whenever you're doing your marketing, it speaks specifically. The only people who really hear it is that ideal customer. Can you talk a little bit about how you shape your message and go find your ideal customer avatar?
Well, so there's a lot of things. So some of it's as simple as just being specific in what you say. So again, if I say to you, well, I'm an intellectual property lawyer for entrepreneurs, it kind of blandly or broadly speaks to people. But if I say I'm an intellectual property lawyer for entrepreneurs and I focus on working with online coaches and online trainers, if you think about it, if you're an online coach, you immediately say, okay, hey, this guy's talking to me. And so just that little tweak of actually saying it, of who you really anticipate talking to, makes it better so that people will hear it and say, okay, well, hey, he's talking to me. He serves people like me. So that's a first step. And that's just an obvious step. But other things that I do is, you have to look at it from the eyes of your customer. And this is something that took me a while to get, because lawyers as a group are ingrained with some horrible habits and horrible thinking when it comes to marketing. First, we're largely taught marketing is evil, marketing is bad. That's kind of the bar association that you have to be a member of to be a lawyer for many states. Every state you have to be a member, and some of them just have some very arcane rules. Some, for example, require you submit your website to be reviewed by this bar association before you publish it. And if you think about it, that makes it really hard to do a lot of online marketing. So you're first taught it's not good to market. But then the lawyers who are marketing, largely at least, they have a really screwed and kind of messed up view of how to market. So marketing to most lawyers is, well, I'm going to write for journals and magazines that are read by other lawyers. I'm going to join my bar association and mingle with other lawyers in my particular practice area. And I'm going to go to these various conventions of other lawyers. Well, that's just silly. For some lawyers, it makes sense if their clients will tend to be big companies where the decision maker on who to hire is made by an in-house lawyer. But for someone like me, that's not the case. So talking to other lawyers is just silly. I need to be talking to the business people, the actual entrepreneurs. So that's part of it, is thinking through what are they interested in. So if you look at my Twitter feed, for example, there's some things about law, but a lot of this stuff is just general issues. One of my tweets that went out this morning was about, tweeting an article. I don't remember if it's business.com or entrepreneur.com, one of those. It was about the 10 traits of successful entrepreneurs. And as you can imagine, given that my followers are largely my potential customers, that got a lot more traction than writing about trademarks did, because that's what they're interested in. So that's a way to kind of build engagement and build a connection with my ideal customers, so that they understand, hey, I'm with you. I'm reading the same things you are. I'm digesting the same information you are, and I'm thinking about the same things you're thinking about. So that's part of the way I do it as well.
Outstanding. Another quick question was on you talked about your passion and doing something that you're passionate about. How important is that for people starting their businesses today? Do you think it's a requirement for success? Do you think it just makes life easier? What would be your recommendation if someone's good at something but not necessarily enjoying it, maybe as much as what they had a taste of, kind of like whenever you kind of shifted gears into the intellectual property? What would be your recommendation?
Well, see, I don't like to say that anything's a requirement, because then you'll be proven wrong.
Right.
But what I would say is that I can't imagine being an entrepreneur with my own business if I wasn't passionate about what I did. And the passion can come in various ways. It could come in the subject matter. It could come in the people you're working for. It could come in a lot of different ways. But I think you need to have a passion for something. And let me give you an example of how you could be passionate about who you're working for. For example, my brother-in-law is a vet, and he has gone through this yoga training with, I think, the idea being that he will eventually become a yoga trainer for other vets to help them deal with issues. So to him, the passion, I mean, he likes yoga, but I think the passion is more about working with veterans. And to him, that's something he's passionate about. So that's something that I think will feed him. And the importance of that is, look, when you start your own business, you will, unless you're lucky and have a lot of money from somewhere, you're going to be the chief cook and bottle washer. You're going to do everything for your business. You're going to need to spend a lot of hours doing things, sending, a couple more emails, making a couple more calls, spending another 30 minutes on marketing at the end of the day, and all of these things. And if you're not passionate about what you do, it's going to be much harder to burn the midnight oil. It's going to be much harder to do all those things. Whereas if you're passionate about it, you're happy to do these things because you know that it's part of building this. And again, with me now, especially, I'm passionate largely about getting this message out to entrepreneurs to help them. So, I've done some of these podcast interviews like on Saturday. I think I did one on a Sunday. I've done some late at night because my passion here is, hey, I want to get this message out there. And every one of these podcasts I get on is, another group of people who will hear this message and hopefully they'll understand the importance of this. And so, it'll make a change in their life. So I think having that passion is important. I wouldn't say it's a requirement. There are definitely people who I think are successful because they're not passionate about it. But, if you're not passionate about it, you should probably work for somebody rather than be an entrepreneur yourself.
Absolutely right. When you first started your practice, what were some of the challenges that you faced?
Well, there were a lot. Among other things, I really knew nothing about marketing, quite honestly. I when I started, I initially did marketing like I described lawyers doing. I was thinking, oh, well, I will, I'll write for these. There's this journal called it's called Law 360, and then they have subgroups. It's basically read by lawyers. It's you write articles. They're just news items, but then an expert, you can do this analysis. So I did this analysis piece of this case decision by a court. But I mean, I'm basically writing for people who would never hire me because they're my competition. So I was doing that and going to associations, and I didn't understand. I was like, why? What's wrong? Why isn't this working? So I had to learn all about marketing and really how to build a marketing strategy. And I found the inbound marketing method of content marketing, creating great content, creating lead magnets, doing all of those things to kind of get people drawn in, to get them from someone who doesn't know who you are to someone who, hopefully if they're on your list and they at some point call you, they're going to be a really warm lead because they know, like, and trust you. They know what you do, and they probably know about where your price point is. So you don't really have to do a lot of selling. And that's kind of important because I'm also not someone who loves selling. I enjoy providing a service and helping people understand that, but I'm not someone who inherently enjoys selling. So that's kind of a challenge. And I think a good marketing plan will help you get over that because, like I said, by the time you're talking to someone to make a sale, they're already warmed up, and it really is talking about how you can serve them. More than trying to convince them that they need the service in the first instance, which I think is a big difference for someone. Similarly, I'm a bit of an introvert. I enjoy one-on-one conversations. I'm great in small groups, but you put me in a big networking event, and it's probably chills down my spine. I try to find the one person I know, and then end up the two of us in a corner talking the whole night. So it's not really great that way. Again, I've tried to overcome that by using marketing methods that don't rely on me, getting out there and going up to someone and putting my hand out to introduce myself for the first time. Instead, I'm doing a lot of the first introductions online. So by the time I'm talking to someone, they know who I am and I know who they are. So it makes me more comfortable. Then there were just the other challenges, obviously, that you have to deal with on cash flow issues and all just the running a business aspect. But I think the marketing and my lack of marketing and sales and networking experience were really the biggest problems I faced when I went out on my own.
When you're talking about the marketing, one of the things that drew me to you is the fact that you haven't done only one book. I think you've done 3 books total on your subject. How do you integrate that into your marketing?
Yeah, well, I've got 2 books now, and there will be a third one coming out hopefully soon. The the first book was, again, it was when I was kind of meandering and not thinking through this. It started as this notion that I was going to write a small, there's these things called mini books that you can create. I was going to write this little thing. It's almost like a pamphlet, if you will, about patent litigation, about lawsuits involving patents, to give to my potential clients, just to help them understand the process a little bit. Because I believe that, hey, an informed client is a better client. I spent so much time creating that book, editing it, doing all of these things. And quite honestly, I wasn't thinking long term on that one, and I wasn't thinking great. I mean, yeah, it's great that I, have this out there. Candidly, I believe the people who probably buy it the most, because it ended up in a full-fledged, like 200-page book. I think the people who probably have bought it the most are my opposing counsel, so lawyers on the other side who just want to see what I have to say. But it's fine. I mean, it's out there and people can see it. I think students read it. There have been reviews suggesting that young lawyers getting into patent lawsuits should, in that area of law, should read it. But that one I was not intentional about. I kind of stumbled into it and did it. But after that, on my second book, it's called The Entrepreneur's IP Planning Playbook. And it's a book that, it's a little short thing, it's about 80 pages or so, that walks entrepreneurs through the process of kind of creating a plan and a strategy for their intellectual property, from soup to nuts. It kind of gives them the idea of, hey, you start, first thing you got to do is figure out what you have. Where are you right now? And kind of run through what I call an IP audit, and it works them through that process. And that book was very intentional. I mean, I created that with an intent of saying, hey, I need to get this information out there to potential entrepreneurs. And this was kind of before I had really gotten to the point of truly niching down to online entrepreneurs. So it applies really to any entrepreneur out there, from a solopreneur all the way up to a startup, or even a kind of a company that doesn't yet have in-house lawyers that handle intellectual property specifically. So anyone in that spectrum can read it and get a sense of what to do. And like I said, I wrote it with the purpose of thinking about, hey, I'm going to provide value. And not only am I going to provide value, I give that book away for free. I give both of them away, but I give that book away for free to anybody who'll give me their email address. So I was, it was at the time, my crown jewel lead magnet that I created. And a lot of people aren't willing to put in that kind of time to write this 80-page book as a lead magnet. But I said, hey, I'm never going to make money, long term at least, selling books about intellectual property. But if I can get this information into people's hands, at some point down the line, they may decide they want to hire a lawyer to help them. And so I will be the first person on their mind to do it. So that was the thinking on the second book.
Okay. You mentioned your Twitter feed. What other social media outlets are you active on, if any, and how can people follow you? What's the best place to go to find out more about you, what you offer, and how they might get some help?
Okay, yeah. So I'm most active on Twitter, and that's at Bobby Klinck, BobbyKlinck. That's where I spend most of my efforts, just because I like the medium. I like the ability to, put out little bits of information. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I'm semi-active there, but not hugely active. But I respond to people, and sometimes I get into good conversations and put some information out there as well. On Facebook, my personal page, I don't really use. By the way, on LinkedIn, it's Robert Klinck, and you'll find me.
Okay.
Facebook, my personal page, I've kept personal. That's kind of the one social media area where I still use to connect with friends and family, and not for business purpose. I have a business page, which is, Klinck LLC. Where I post some information. It can be useful, but I think as a lot of people know, on Facebook these days, if you're using a business page, you don't get a lot of traction. People, even if they follow me and like me, they like the business, they're probably not going to see a lot of the messages I put up there. But I put it up if someone wants to, to find some value. In terms of other things, one of the best ways to get in touch with me is through my website, which is KlinckLLC.com. Again, that's KLINCK LLC.com. There's a lot of things there. You can actually set up a consultation. I offer free 30-minute consultations where we kind of talk through and figure out, hey, can I help you? And if so, then I will map out what we'll do from there, and I'll, create a proposal for people. But so you can sign up for one of those. There's also a lot of free resources. I have the Entrepreneurs IP Academy, which has some information, basics about the areas of law and IP planning, et cetera. You can download my books. There's a page in the Academy that's the books where you can get that information. But also one thing you can get that I think is value is I have a free email course about the 5 biggest legal mistakes that I see entrepreneurs making and what you need to do to avoid them. And you can sign up for that at klinkllc.com/mistakes. And again, it's just a free course. You get a series of 5 emails that walk through the mistakes, why they're mistakes, why you need to think about it, and then what you need to be doing to avoid it.
That you provide a lot of material out there for free. I just want to appreciate you for doing that and helping entrepreneurs as they get ready with this important issue. And I want to thank you for giving me your time this morning. All those links that we talked about for the listening audience, I'll make sure that they're included in the description for the podcast, so that makes it easier for them to get to. But thank you very much, Bobby, for meeting with me today on the phone and sharing your knowledge about not only intellectual property, but some of the challenges and some of your solutions through marketing. And I think of importance when you talked about actually niching down and almost like into the micro specialization, where your business coach was moving you towards that thought process, and how that actually clicked for you once you started doing that. So thank you.
Yep. Well, it's been my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.
You've been listening to the Small Business Evangelist radio show with host Jack Schoenberger. To find out more about resources mentioned during this show, or to let us know you're interested in being a featured guest on an upcoming episode, please visit thesmallbusinessevangelist.com.